folks. I am Judy Pfeiffer, Chief Public Affairs Officer, and I love my AI tools. And I'm sure many of you are using AI tools in your business, and it's rapidly changing our environment. So I'm pleased to introduce my colleague, Jordan Soloway, EVP of Legal and Enforcement, and he's going to lead this great panel on AI.
Thanks, Judy. Good morning, everybody. Before I introduce the panelists, I want to just put a scenario out there. Imagine, if you can, an artificial general intelligence computer that can perform many, many functions, human functions, even better than most humans. It slowly and very gradually begins to malfunction in very subtle ways. Through effective AI governance, I got advice from Carol, the errors are recognized by the human oversight. However, the AI computer that uses what's called sentient AI, it's effectively consciousness awareness, has now determined that it may be shut down, and it preemptively shuts down the human oversight. This isn't from today's Globe and Mail, but it really is a scenario that existed over 50 years ago in Stanley Kubrick's classic 2001: A Space Odyssey. If you really want to scare yourself, imagine AI run by Air Canada Rouge, and then you'll understand what I'm talking about. We're 50 years after Kubrick's masterpiece, and AI is no longer science fiction. It's actually science fact. It's often described, as you know, as the next industrial revolution, and has even been compared to how the discovery of electricity transformed the economy and society at large. There's no question that AI will be transformative, but the extent to which is not clear, which is why I'm very pleased to have this expert panel who have agreed to share their views. Before I do that, I just quickly want to just sort of set some parameters. Bill Gates once famously said that we always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years, but underestimate the change in the next 10 years. If you look at what's going to happen in the next 2 years, it's estimated that over 70% of businesses will start to use data-driven AI, machine learning, or even a blockchain as critical components of their business operations. And the investment in AI by 2025 is estimated to be in the range of $200 billion. So it's pretty staggering. I'm very pleased to have a panel of really leading experts. To my immediate left is Josh Teichman. He's the Vice President of Legal and Corporate Affairs for Radical Ventures. And if you've never heard of Radical Ventures, you should. It is a leading venture capital fund right here in Toronto that's focused on businesses that use transformational AI. Radical Ventures has close to $1 billion in capital to invest in entrepreneurs who apply technology to transform massive industries. What's interesting about Radical Ventures, it's both a product of the Canadian AI ecosystem, and it's also one of its architects. So welcome, Josh. To Josh's left, is Abdi Adid. He is an assistant professor at the University of Toronto Law School, and he is also the legal innovation strategist at Blue Jay Legal, another company, if you haven't heard of, you're going to hear of. It's a leading AI platform that uses machine learning to predict tax law outcomes and recommendations. You can see Abdi during the break to get a tax refund from CRA. And lastly, but not least, is Carol Pavizian, who is the managing partner of INQ Law, a leading boutique law firm and consulting business which provides legal advice to businesses in the area of privacy, data governance, cybersecurity, and AI, along with multidisciplinary services in law, policy, data, and technology. So welcome. I'm going to start, Josh, with you, if you don't mind. Your company is essentially a king or a queen maker in the AI space, and assessing which AI business models you're going to back and why. Can you give us an assessment of how transformative you think AI will be to financial services in Ontario?
Can you guys hear me okay? Should I use the backup mic? Backup mic? Okay. I think when Radical Ventures was formed, the first institutional fund back in 2017, we had a thesis that AI was going to replace all software over a 10-year replacement cycle, which actually aligns neatly with the George Bush estimate of underestimating how much transformation can happen in 10 years. I think so far we've seen that timeline play out quite accurately. And of course, everyone here is familiar with ChatGPT, and when it launched a couple of years ago, it was absolutely transformative. I don't expect financial services will be any different. I think there's a few things about financial services that make it uniquely suited to AI adoption. There's many of them, but I can touch briefly on just maybe a few. I think the first is AI is obviously a very data-hungry endeavor, and you need a lot of high-quality, curated, and labeled data to come up with really powerful AI models. The financial services industry has for a long time been ahead of the curve in generating, collating, and aggregating that high-quality data that are going to be really powerful inputs to AI models. So they're already got a leg up there. I also think financial services sits at the intersection of a few different AI core use cases. So you guys all know ChatGPT is a large language model, but there are also foundation models for other applications, like Pixels with Stability AI and Stable Diffusion, where you can generate images. And there are also now foundation models for numbers and math and financial spreadsheets. And if you put all three of those together, you get some really powerful tools where you can use a pixel model to extract information out of applicant submissions, use a large language model to then summarize and analyze that information, and then use a mathematical and spreadsheet model to create some risk analysis and financial planning. So you kind of put all three of those together, and you have this one enterprise that really can leverage a few different areas that are very powerful AI tools on the market today. Maybe the last way in which I think financial services is uniquely positioned to use AI is the fact that it is actually a regulated industry. And a lot of people think that might be a headwind for adoption of technology. I think when it comes to AI, it actually acts as a bit of a tailwind, because if you think about some of the problems with AI, in particular, like prone to hallucinations and making up information that may not be accurate, if you then take that AI tool and stick it in a sandbox and say, you can only draw on data from this one space, and you're bound by these set of rules and constraints, it's much less likely to hallucinate. I actually think there's a good use case for AI, particularly in regulated spaces, because it can actually be more accurate and highly performant.
I would say a well-regulated space, but anyway. Abdi, it's been observed that one of the main impacts of artificial intelligence will be it will really force businesses to assess how the technology impacts their business strategy, specifically as it relates to predictive modeling. This is really, as I understand it, at the core of what Blue Jay Legal does. Can you comment on how our sectors need to be thinking about the technology for their businesses?
Sure. Thanks for having me. The way that I think about the strategic benefit of using AI is really as a professional augmentation tool. So at Blue Jay, we built these tools that were supposed to supercharge lawyer research. And that was really recognizing that there's an emerging division of labor between human and technology, where we understand that computers can synthesize volumes of data that I can't begin to in a shorter period of time. So maybe everyone up here is a lawyer. Are there a lot of lawyers in the room? Right? Let's imagine.
I think there's two.
There's two?
Yeah.
Let's imagine you're not yourselves, but you're a county lawyer who hangs a shingle somewhere, and you have an office in a strip mall, and someone knocks on your door and says, I've been terminated at work. It feels like it was wrong, right? The rate limiting factor on the quality of advice I can give is, I can start by shooting from the hip. I can tell them a bit about my experience with wrongful dismissal. But at some point, I'm going to have to justify my advice with some rigor. And the rate limiting factor on the quality of advice I can give is how many cases can I read in a day? Right. Well, if you have technology that can purport to synthesize all of the historical case law in the area, and then I can start at a higher floor, I can then reconcile that against my experience, my understanding, my sense of the judge and the locale, my sense of what the appropriate arguments are. And now I have this, I've made use of an intelligent, high-powered assistant. And actually, when you think about things in the context of a division of labor, then some of the concerns that we have around things like inaccuracies start to fall away because they're in a familiar template, right? If ChatGPT is giving you false information, well, maybe you treat it the way you treat the eager intern at your office, right? It's like they're very eager to please. They can work 24 hours a day. They really want to do well by you. They have the vocabulary right, but they don't know anything yet. So what do? You trust but verify, right? And so when we start to think about it in the context of professional augmentation, supercharging what we do, working alongside high-powered assistants in that way, then it becomes utterly familiar to us and we can better navigate the risks. And so the main strategic benefit for businesses right now is to think through the chance of supercharging the professional work they're already doing and recognizing that the technology is just attempting to do the thing that you're also attempting to do. And so rather than oppose it, work harmoniously with it. As lawyers, what are we doing except trying to predict outcomes? If that person who knocked on my door, my office door, said, hey, I've been terminated from my job, what do I do? They'd be frustrated if I started reciting the multi-part test for wrongful dismissal or gave them the contours of the doctrine. No, they want to know what's going to happen.
Yep.
And so if tech can predict, and it can work alongside us to predict, then why would we oppose it?
I guess I was going to say the only difference is the law firm gets to charge that person with lack of knowledge out at $500 an hour, which they're not going to be able to do with ChatGPT.
There's always ways to charge money.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, don't worry about it.
Carol, you have been a little bit like a canary in a coal mine with AI, focusing on the business uses to be both responsible and ethical. I was joking about Air Canada Rouge, but everyone knows a few weeks ago Air Canada got into trouble and made the news because one of its chatbots gave inaccurate advice about its bereavement policy, which caused the financial exposure and lots of reputational risk. Is this isolated, just Air Canada, or is this really a harbinger of things to come with AI?
It's not isolated. As you heard, there are some really great use cases for artificial intelligence and ways it can augment productivity. It can identify new markets. It can help us with, predictions and other really valuable uses. So there are lots of ways where artificial intelligence will be extremely valuable to our businesses. At the same time, we have to recognize that there are limitations, and you heard Josh talk about some of those. There are limitations with the technology that if you don't appreciate the limitations and put in place some reasonable mitigating factors, you are at risk of the type of reputational harm or more that Air Canada faced as an example. And they are not alone. There are professionals who have used artificial intelligence in formal briefing documents and have been slammed for the fact that the system unearthed, information that was not true. We see it happening in triaging in sort of health sector where artificial intelligence is used in triaging services and there's baked in discrimination that wasn't caught in advance, and that caused significant harm to individuals on the receiving end of that. And the list goes on. There's actually, if you're curious, there's actually an AI incident database. You just literally Google AI incident database and it's the first thing that will come up. And I would look at it with some, a critical eye, but it's interesting to see the types of incidents that are being documented. And those incidents reflect some of the legal, reputational, ethical, and other risks that come with the use of artificial intelligence. So it's by no means a standalone. We will see lots of these examples come up, but there are things that can be done to mitigate some of those risks and put in place more governance so you're using the technology more responsibly.
Are you seeing businesses doing that?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So the first thing with ChatGPT, and we in Canada, we have similar types systems like Cohere that have large language models that we can be using as well. So the first thing we saw is an acceptable use policy for AI, for generative AI in particular. That became all the rage. Since then, we have seen greater investment in an AI governance framework, a suite of AI-related policies. If you are at all curious, which I'm sure you all are, there is an interesting ISO standard, and I know we all like reading ISO standards, but it's 42001, and it gives some good guidance about what an responsible AI management framework could look like. So even if you don't want to read the nuts and bolts of the actual standard, look at the index. Just peruse the index to get some ideas about what people are doing, what different organizations are doing. You're going to see there's a suite of policies and procedures that touch on appropriate use, risk mitigation, impact assessments, incident response. Then there will be an entire risk management framework that is put in place to help mitigate some of those potential risks of the higher use cases. And then there are governance structures in place, including various committees. You organize it according to your own internal culture, but they do help set up that appropriate oversight of the higher risk use cases, not of every single use of artificial intelligence.
Thank you. Josh, can I come back to you for a second? So there's a famous quote by Peter Drucker who said, "The only purpose of a business is to create a customer." I'm sure you've heard that. Your company looks, as I understand it, at the ability of AI to transform a given business, right, to improve it. How does AI enable financial services businesses to personalize the customer experience, offer tailored product recommendations, and generally improve customer engagement?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there, but AI can sort of supercharge not just the customer experience, but also the vendor experience and the agent and broker experience. If we zoom in on the customer experience in particular, I think there's use cases at almost every stage of the customer experience journey, from finding out what services you even need in the first place, to connecting with a service provider, evaluating them, running through the sales process, concluding a sale, and then getting support on the back end. We're already seeing AI tools in all of these spaces.
Right.
Some of them kind of try to go end to end, and some of them focus on a specific vertical. But lots of them exist, and there's lots more coming. I also think when you think about whether an AI tool is the right tool for a particular purpose, you got to think about, does it, first of all, balance the risks that we were talking about, but also actually make the customer's life easier? Because if at the end of the day, improves outcomes, but introduces a whole lot of challenges and the customer doesn't trust it, it's not going to get widely adopted. So we think about, can the customer access the tool outside of office hours that would normally be restrictive if they want to learn about their policy, for example?
Right.
Can they go ask an AI chatbot about their policy and not wait till 9 in the morning to talk to their broker when their office opens? There's lots of tools trying to solve that problem. There's also lots of tools now that I sort of put in a family of AI tools trying to figure out a better way of analyzing the risk profile of an applicant. And if you can get more granular in that risk profile, you can then better match them to an underwriter or provider who has appetite for that risk, and then create sort of customized or tailored policies for them that previously was just not possible because the man hours involved in creating that policy was just too high.
Right.
You can now create the policy and service that policy all using AI, and then support it on the back end through, again, sort of uses of chatbot type functionality when customers have questions about it.
And thereby improve the customer experience.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Carol, maybe back to you for a second, because we have lots of people in the room who sit on the board of entities or businesses we regulate. How do you balance, or how do you strike the right balance of an AI-driven automation and all the benefits that Josh has spoken to, and efficiency with the need to maintain human oversight and accountability, especially in sensitive areas? For example, our credit unions do loan underwriting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the first thing I would always say is figure out what your use cases are and figure out what existing sort of data security and data governance practices you have in place. And figure out, as I said, what your use cases are. So where are you going? Where do you think you're going to be using this technology? Because what you will want to do is bridge the gap between where you are today and where you are going to be going in the next 3 to 5 years. And I strongly encourage everyone to be a bit ambitious about it. There are absolutely distinct risks with AI, but they're not insurmountable risks. Or if they are, then at least you know which use cases to avoid. So bridging that gap becomes very, very important. And then you can start to put in place a reasonable, responsible AI plan that will allow you to operationalize while mitigating and lessening some of those distinct risks. So the number one thing that I caution every, especially Canadian company, is not to be so fearful of the technology because of all the hype around the risks that you don't start investing in understanding where it can actually be quite beneficial to your business. The good news in all of this is that there is a reasonable way forward, especially for the initial use cases that you're likely to take on, which are probably lower risk and higher productivity, so you can demonstrate that good ROI. And this is a lawyer speaking, right? Like, I should be telling you, don't touch it with a 10-foot pole and get away from it. But actually, I see a distinct risk on the opposite side, which is not only the competitive disadvantage of not using it, but also overall, we can all be playing to our higher strengths, I think, if we've got some technology to augment our intelligence.
And do you see, if I can follow up, do you see that discussion starting at the board level, or is it starting at management?
Absolutely. It is absolutely happening at the board level. And increasingly, boards, especially of larger organizations, are bringing on that kind of expertise for board education. Over time, we are going to see what's happening in the cybersecurity world, which is you're going to want that expertise actually sitting on your board. We're not there yet with AI.
Right. The regulators will require it, probably. Yeah.
Absolutely. They should.
Abdi, coming back to you, so Blue Jay Legal, purpose-driven generative AI platform built on an authoritative tax law database to provide predictive analysis to customers, mainly lawyers. Do you see the business model as having broader application to financial services? For example, could you use it to give advice on a mortgage or auto insurance or home insurance?
Yeah, I think one of the points that Josh made earlier is that we're trending towards more consolidation, right? More domain expertise. So if you think about ChatGPT, one of the things that's so exciting but also frustrating about it is that it's trained on, let's call it the sum total of the internet, right? So that's part of why it's interesting and exciting, but also why it's unreliable, why you won't ask it a factual question, right? You might ask it to write your biography or obituary, which you can ask it to do. And it might give you things that sound compelling, that sound like they ought to be about you, but maybe aren't specific enough about you. Well, that's because it's a language model, right? It's at best a predictive or probabilistic determination of the next likely word. Well, what if you took that language generation capacity and you married it to a knowledge model, language model, knowledge model, where you said, let's only pull from vetted, scored information in a specific area. Well, in a regulated profession where you have a data-rich environment and where you have people who are tasked, compliance officers, others, who can be tasked with sort of attesting to the veracity of that information, then you have a chance to really say, let's use all the language generation capacity of this tool, but limit what it can pull from to information that we know. And that's actually a trend that you're seeing everywhere. So in education, I was talking to a community organization the other day, which was saying, we're going to use a large language model and train it on high school physics textbooks so that the kids can have a tutor that's available all hours of the night at any time for low cost, right? And so the trend towards that kind of domain expertise is a wonderful thing, not only because it brings costs down, but it gets the right people into the space. One of the things that Carol was mentioning was having human beings involved in the loop. Well, if we're trending towards more domain expertise at a technological level, then it means we're going to need more domain experts to verify the information, participate in the development. I'll tell one very, very quick story, which is, I talk about this all the time, this lawsuit against the state of Arkansas by the Legal Aid Society. And in Arkansas, they decided to use an algorithm to replace nurses who were determining in the past who was entitled to a personal support worker. So you could apply for state funding if you're someone with mobility issues. They terminated the nurses, had an algorithm, and the algorithm asks you questions like, do you have foot pain, yes or no? The idea being if you have foot pain, you're more likely to need a PSW. The following people were answering no to the question of do you have foot pain. People who are paraplegic, people who are quadriplegic, people who are amputees. So there's two ways to look at that. One way is say, let's never use technology in this context. The other way to look at it is say, instead of terminating the nurses, why not have them work on the questionnaire design? Or better yet, use your common sense and have a not available option for the question of does someone have a foot pain instead of forcing them to a binary choice. So that domain expertise is totally critically necessary. The last thing I'll say on this is, when we're talking about insights for consumers, we have to recognize that we're in a very different world than we used to be. Things like targeting consumers with their data in order to market better prices to them is like, that's yesterday's. That's like Expedia or iTravel or something. What we're talking about now is anticipatory marketing. We're talking about being able to get information to people, not just based on what do we know about them, but based on what we know about the 360 degrees that surround them, their location, the people around them, not just their own buying history, but the buying history of people around, that they interact with. And not just that, but also synthetic models of all that information so we can run yet more granular simulations. And so I think that if we keep thinking about AI for, say, consumer insights or positioning things that are better priced to people, we might be talking about an old model. What AI is capable of now, given that it has a basically infinite amount of data crunching power, is much more powerful than that. And the key now is starting at the governance level to think through how to mitigate those risks.
So can I ask you something? Because one of the things that struck me was, the promise of technology 20 years ago was that we were going to have a 3-day work week. We'd have more time for our families, our lifestyles, and the exact opposite has happened. Do you think AI will deliver that promise?
The promise of
Freeing up
being so
capacity.
productive that we get more free time?
Yeah.
Oh, not a chance.
Okay.
I think the evidence is plain that we're going to find yet more applications, more ways that we can do more work. Like, as I mentioned, think about the example of the individual who's suddenly much more productive. If the rate limiting factor in the past was how many clients they can take on, they'll just take on more instead of going home. But I think the insight here is even more profound than that, which is we're at a stage right now, the trajectory towards artificial general intelligence is not linear. There's a messy interregnum along the way. And so right now, AI is generating all kinds of legal problems, right? It's generating all kinds of concerns that are requiring a second look, a critical eye, policies and procedures. So in our hunt for productivity, we're also generating all this secondary market of labor, basically.
I'm in.
Where, likewise, I mean, we're all kind of here because of that, right? And so the chances of it being contributing to a strict decrease in the amount of work that we do, just it doesn't seem probable.
I was this close to getting Mark to go to a 3-day work week for us. And you totally kiboshed it.
No, there's much more likely to be a 6-day work week in the world of AI.
So maybe I'll just put out there, and whoever wants to jump on this one, there's a lot of focus, as you know, in the media about AI replacing various professional jobs, lawyers, accountants, and it will change the structure of the economy. In financial services, though, I think it's fair to say that it actually will have beneficial impacts in the area of risk management, fraud detection, and regulatory compliance. Can any of you comment on that? Maybe starting with...
I can go first, and maybe just on the topic of replacing humans in the workforce. I mean, I generally think of AI tools in this space in one of two buckets. One is sort of fully autonomous AI, and the second is just co-pilots. And there's a ton of co-pilots on the market that augment a human worker but don't replace them. I think the more regulated the space is, the more likely it is we're going to see more of those co-pilots as opposed to fully autonomous software, because I think regulators are just going to be more comfortable with it, knowing that there's ultimately a human still involved in the decision making, still applying their professional judgment, giving advice, et cetera. So we can talk lots about sort of the risk mitigation and all that, but I do think at the end of the day, the tools we're going to see hit the market are more likely to be those co-pilots that don't actually replace jobs, that they make you more powerful, make you more proficient, and give you that efficiency boost.
Carol, you were going to jump in?
I just want to highlight the point that there is transition right now, right? So we are very much in a world where we are trying to understand the technology as it changes exponentially, or it feels like it is. So that's certainly the feeling, and we're trying to adapt to it. And so we're using these very sort of analog constructs to make sense of what a much more digitally integrated world looks like, and that is very, very challenging. So I think a practical tip to take away is to sit down and really think through where there are strategic uses for this technology now. And I know I've said that, but I think it's really critical because it will start to shape that idea of what are we augmenting and what are we replacing? So what does it look like to go through that transition? And what do we anticipate the other side of the transition looking like so that we can be a little bit more ready and much more agile in our strategic approach? And I think that's also helpful from a change management perspective because all of this transition is also very, very, very difficult on workers and just this feeling of insecurity that, I might be replaced. Even within my own law firm, I have to remind people, this is about enabling you to play to your higher strengths as opposed to doing the stuff that we really shouldn't be doing and charging for in any case. So that change management piece, which is the people part of all of this, should not be underestimated. There's a lot of transition happening right now, and we need to help individuals understand what this transition process looks like and what the ultimate vision looks like and where they fit in.
So we have 2 minutes. I do want to take time just to make sure there's any questions in the audience because we have, just an amazing panel here. I can't see the question. Can one of you see it? Are you closer?
We have a question here. Similar to how climate change has introduced new risk classes such as transition and physical risk, what new classes do you see AI introducing in the financial sector?
Josh, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think the broad risks that AI introduces generally are still going to apply in financial services. So confidentiality is going to be a big issue. And there's a bit of a tension there because if you want your AI to be highly performant, you want it to have more data, and you want that data to come from a broad number of sources so that it has more context. But then you start blending information from different sources, and you get into more issues about confidentiality. So I think one area that we're going to have to think about in financial services in particular is going to be how do we make sure we have a lot of good quality data that comes from multiple contexts and yet still preserves the confidentiality. I think that's one sort of unique risk, particularly with AI and financial services in particular.
I might just add that I think the nature of the risks faced by financial institutions is just going to become more complicated. Threat actors also have AI in their possession, and they're governed by absolutely no one but themselves. So I would just be mindful of the changing threat landscape as well, and the insecurity of some of these systems, and who has access to some of these systems.
If I can
absolutely.
add one thing, there has to be a cultural shift as we embrace AI, which is, I think, if I may, we have to kind of increase our error tolerance when it comes to technology. So if I hit my space bar on my laptop and it doesn't move the cursor a millimeter, if it doesn't move the cursor a millimeter on my word processor, my laptop is broken. I might throw it against the wall, right? It's clearly a failure, binary states of fail or not. But if I'm asking a AI application to do something like draft a memo, then I can't think about it in these binary states of failure or not. And error, the fact that it produces error, can't condemn it in the same way that me hitting the space bar on my laptop not working will condemn my laptop. You have to, again, force it into the familiar template of the division of labor where if someone that you work with, a junior colleague, gave you a memo and it had some issues, you would find a way to work with them and engage in this dialogical, iterative process. If AI is aspiring to these higher order tasks, it's going to misfire sometimes. And until we can absorb that cultural reality of needing to increase our error tolerance, we're probably going to have the same conversation over and over again where we're not going to realize all the gains that are in front of us.
So I'm conscious of time. I'm also conscious that we're the last panel before lunch. So what I did last night was I went on to ChatGPT, pardon me, and I said, what are the best wrap-up comments to ask an expert panel on AI? And what I got back was, as we conclude our discussion today, it is clear that artificial intelligence is not just revolutionizing financial services, but it's redefining the very nature of how we interact with data, markets, and customers. Predictive analytics to algorithmic trading, AI has become the cornerstone of innovation in the financial sector, driving efficiency, accuracy, and agility like never before. Our panel has underscored the importance of responsible AI implementation, ensuring transparency, fairness, and ethical considerations remain at the forefront of our strategies. That's pretty good. So Mark's like thinking, okay, I can get rid of Solway and I can get ChatGPT. Please join me in thanking our panelists who,